There we go. All right, so we're officially live. This is our next episode of Talking Crit. Austin with the Crit One and Done team. I'm here with Dan. Dan, you want to
Hello.
introduce yourself and tell us about a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely. My name is Dan Cody. I recently made a TTRPG called Axes and Axes, and it's companion setting, The Knowing Lands. The book is available. You can find out more about it on subtlegiants.com, and there's an Instagram, a Discord, a Printify, Itch.io, Drive Through, all that sort of stuff. I don't want to bog things down too much, but it's a new company, it's a new game. I think it's pretty unique, and I hope some of you guys would enjoy learning about it, playing it, and all that jazz.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all here for the shameless plugs for
Sure.
I gotta do my own too. So I'm sponsored by LR Terrain. LR Terrain is run by a great guy called Rich. He runs the Long Island Tabletop Convention where we met.
Mm.
We're also sponsored by WizardsWorks. WizardsWorks also at the Tabletop Convention. They sell tabletop accessories, things like that. Designed by Moonshine makes our dice. They're a beautiful company out of Australia. Check them out, their Instagram. And Geek Haven has another Etsy store. They sponsor the clothing that we wear here at Crit One and Done. Do you have any shameless plugs you want to do? Get them in now.
I made the terrible mistake of doing everything myself. It's great in some ways, but I really have no idea what I'm doing. So I have no sponsors. I have no one who knows I exist. So,
well, to be fair, Mike works in sales when he's not doing this nerdy stuff with us, so he handles all that stuff. I'm a teacher. I don't do the whole like marketing and talking, reaching out for sponsors. I let Mike handle all that stuff.
It's a whole thing, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's a whole nother discussion. Just but let's jump into it. First question I have for our little interview here is when did you start getting interested in fantasy, and what kind of games really drew you into it, either games or novels or anything like that?
So this is the first question right off the bat is one that I'm worried might create a bunch of digressions. I've never not been into gaming. I don't remember being a child and not knowing, ever learning it. But when I say gaming, I do mean specifically video gaming or magic cards or board games or things like that. To be perfectly frank, I stayed very far away from tabletop games for a long time. And it's because I detected in them something that I didn't want or need. And I suspected that was the core purpose of them because, like I said, I had kept them at an arm's length. You know, I had played CRPGs, not too many of them, but some, JRPGs, all that stuff that are kind of tangential to tabletop gaming. But the actual act of sitting down and playing them, to me, felt like they were engaging with a style of immersive method acting that felt like it was less focused on the elements of gameplay and storytelling that were important to me, and it was more about immersion. I was never someone who was very interested in RP or RP servers or immersive types of things. I learned at a very young age, relatively young age, that I don't really much care about spoilers, because if something is good enough, the spoilers shouldn't ruin it, because I should be able to watch it multiple times anyway. And I found myself, when I would talk to people that would care about things like spoilers, it's because they were immersed in the moment and they wanted that first experience. And it was just never something that appealed to me. I got into tabletops when I kind of had this realization that was only one avenue through which tabletop games can be played, and that you can treat them as more of a storytelling avenue, a vector that is outside of yourself. That is an improv way to tell a story as if you were a writer. You don't have to think of your character as an extension of yourself. You can act them as if they are not you, or you putting yourself in those shoes, but as a character you want to exist on a page. And as someone who was always a very casual, personal writer since I was a kid, I've always been writing different stories, none of them released, mind you, but that's what appealed to me. That's what all of a sudden it felt like, this is a jam band of writing. Okay, that I'm into. So yeah, I came at tabletop games at a very oblique angle, probably about 6 years ago, just before COVID, and then I had a lot to do.
Yeah, everyone had a lot of time then. But I would say very similar for me. I played a lot of video games as a kid. For me, video games was like a very competitive avenue. Even board
Mm,
games, playing like Risk or like
yeah,
chess or like Stratego. I remember playing like hours of Stratego, and it's just being very a competitive sense. And
sure.
same thing to me. I didn't get into like D&D or real tabletop stuff until same thing. I would say late teens, early 20s. So like 15
Yeah.
years ago. I'm
Well,
old,
okay.
apparently.
No, no, I'm not inside you. I don't know how youthful you think I am, but I'm like 37.
I'm
Um,
35, so we're right about the same.
hey,
Yeah, but
hey,
it was something at first that was to me like intimidating because like oh like you gotta like be able to like act and like like fill a role where it's like if I'm playing Skyrim, I can just do what I want and all the prompts are there. I don't have to think of what to say. It's just there.
it's funny because it actually has changed the way I play games like Skyrim or Disco Elysium or Divinity or any of those, because I used to just play them how I would react to situations because I felt it was like when there were moral quandaries, it was how do you feel about them? How do you engage with this world? And since I started playing tabletops, I have started to create characters, a role that I'm playing and go, well, I wouldn't do this, but this character would. And that's I
Yes.
never did that before. And I realized that other people did, and it missed me completely. It was just I felt like I was going at it too blithely honestly in a way that it was all of a sudden I realized, oh, that might not be the intent.
No, I completely agree. When I like first started playing Skyrim, that was like one of
Right.
my first real dips into like RPGs. That and Fallout. It was
Oh,
always
sure.
from a perspective of what would I do in this situation, not what would they do. And like playing Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop games, let me go, hey, I know what I would do, but what would this person do?
No, yeah, and there is a fun in that, and I don't know if you'd call it immersion or not, but I do enjoy trying to perceive the world from different angles, and engaging in that intellectual exercise. Again, I don't. Maybe at some point in my life I will, but I don't really get into the character and lose myself. It's fun. It feels honestly, it feels more like acting or lying than it does like role playing. Uh, but yeah, you know, and partly I think I might blame my first brush. I mean, like I said, I've been playing games since I was uh, tiny, until since I was a thought. And my older brother was always the one playing them, and he got super heavy into JRPGs. And those are a lot more straightforward. Those are here's the story, you are playing it, and I think that's just kind of how I engage with it, and it just never thought to question it until later on in life. The main reason, honestly, I got into tabletop RPGs is in another lifetime, tried to get into comics. I'm an artist and I'm a writer, and breaking into that industry is tough. And I didn't have a particular love for comics either, but when I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, I realized that I wanted to be a creator and that I wanted to create things by myself, and that I wanted to create something in a medium that felt feature complete, that was reasonable for a single person to do. And so I thought to myself that that would be comics. You could tell a story over a period of time. You have images, you have dialogue, you have all these elements, but it's not animation where it takes forever. So I tried to go for comics. I had a lot of difficulty breaking into that industry, and as I was starting to get kind of burned out on it, and friends and were getting into tabletop games, and the world started turning in that direction, I started to think of tabletop games as a creative outlet for myself, as a way to make something creative that would feasibly be something I can make myself. Now, I was wrong that it was feasible, because it wasn't, which was a terrible idea. But I'm here now. But yeah, this is I see this first and foremost as a creative exercise, as something that a product that I'm creating, not because it is something that I'm going to make a lot of money off of, because it's not. This is the medium I want to work in. And so I learned to love tabletop games from the other way around, much in the same way that I did with comics. I decided I wanted to spend my life making comics, and then I realized I only read like two, so I started reading a bunch of comics. So yeah, I mean, for me, it is a little intimidating at times because I go into a room and people talk about systems or modules or things that I have never heard of or even come close to, and I keep expecting people to go. I go, oh, I got this new system. And then I show up and they're like, this is exactly like blank or whatever. But yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I am engaged with the creative potential of it, with the idea of it. It attracts me on an intellectual level. I don't know if you say you play games. I don't know if you've gotten too much into some of the more indie things like your Braids or your or like not well not Dark Souls, but like Braid or like Undertale, or there's one called Doki Doki Literature Club. Anyway, sorry. My point is that there was this breed of game that came out when I was 20 that started to intentionally target something that games had only hinted at before, which was a breaking down of the fourth wall and to create an abstraction in which the players themselves are complicit in the happenings of the moral functions, not in like it's a TTRPG. What am I doing? I do this. Oh no, that puppy died. More that you, the player, are complicit in the choices. That you are the fourth wall is behind you, not between you and the game. And there started to be a lot of like Spec Ops: The Line is a famous one, where it was about you feeling like you had no choice to commit war crimes, which is what the character feels, but then blaming you, telling you that that was an incorrect way to feel. You're just as forced as he is, and just because you're playing the game doesn't mean you have to do it. You literally have to progress, but you don't have to progress the game. It's your fault. You did that.
Yeah, that's
And
very interesting.
what I found was tabletop games have this power to do that in a way that video games really like they found that they could, and in a way beyond what even they could. And I found, despite the fact that most video games are and the RPG elements of them are based off of a history of tabletop games, that tabletop gaming itself was not really interested in cresting that hill. From my perspective, again, I could be wrong. And so a lot of what I did was kind of uh, engaging with that idea of bringing that level of interactive uh, playing to the experience with the intent of exploring that directly, specifically, instead of it being a consequence, an emergent element of just tabletop gaming, to design something specifically to impugn the player, to force them to engage with it on that level. So the core principle, the core guiding adjective when I was creating something was always consequence. Everything has a consequence, mechanically and narratively, and that's the whole crux of everything, is feeling like what you do matters, not just because you're affecting a living world, but that living world should be affecting you, and that you should feel responsible for existing inside of it, rather than being it's the gaming equivalent of leave only footprints and take only pictures. You're in this
Yeah,
world. This isn't a playground that exists for you. You should feel like if this imagination means anything to you, then you should treat it as if it were real, because to them it is. And just because they're not real people doesn't mean it's not a reflection off of how you interpret engaging with real people. It should, again, like I said, I want to tackle this first and foremost from an artistic perspective. So I think that probably answers your question. Sorry.
no, that was great. And like, I agree with a lot. I really like never thought of it from that perspective. To me, like, yes, coming from an artistic, intellectual, try to like really think about like consequences themselves. Like one of the games I know, we rotate DMs, and one of the things I'm like telling the guys I'm up next, I'm like, hey, like, there's gonna be consequences for everything
Mm.
you do. And
Yeah.
when I'm building the story, it's like I have some of the story built, but I'm waiting for them to build their characters. So,
Right.
because the idea is, I don't want it to be like, here's a set story, and you want to save the town because you're good people. It's like, no,
Right.
I want a personal connection to the main story, so that you're driven to do it. You're not just doing it because it's like, oh well, we guess we looked at these clues and we kind of have to do this thing. I want
Um,
like that personal,
right.
like, grit involved into it, and for them to like leave going, oh my god, did I do the right thing? Like,
Yeah.
did I screw up there?
Um, there's a phrase I've been thinking of a lot recently. It's not a phrase that exists. I thought I was trying to find a pithy way to describe, to articulate what I wanted, and I think it's people always talk about stories as if they have teeth or not. How hard do they bite? How hard do they make you feel?
Yes.
And I think that that's a good thing, but I'm realizing as a creator, I don't want to decide how hard I am biting. I want, as a person engaging in something, as someone that, as a consumer of this product, and also someone who would be creating something for me, I don't want it to bite a harder or softer. I want it to find more tender flesh to bite. I want it to feel like there's something new, that some stone unturned in me, that it's tackling from a different perspective of like, oh God, I've never had to think about these consequences before. This is a new way for me to, oh, what would I do? And again, I don't know if I've achieved that, but that was one of the core guiding principles of the design of how I thought about this from top down.
So that kind of like ties into like the second question, whereas the game you're created is, so consequences, would you say, is that like one of the core, like, maybe not themes, that might not be the correct word, but one of the core things. Okay, so yeah, so like one of the core themes is consequences, and not just like, did you do it right, did you do it wrong, but like morally conflicting with yourself
So
within the game itself.
the tagline, I mean, if this game has a tagline, it's what happened, the setting at least. It's what happens after the heroes win. The truth is, everything has consequences. So I would say very much so is a theme, is themed around consequence. As an aside, before I get into the details, I did want to say I found, in the same way that I got into tabletop gaming in an oblique angle, I also got into fantasy at an oblique angle. I had stayed away from it for a while because a lot of it is what I perceive to be what I call kitchen sink fantasy, which is you throw everything but the kitchen sink in there. You have elves and werewolves and orcs and demons, and it's all there. And to me, that's antithetical to the idea of creation. And I get why it exists from a mechanical perspective, because you want DMs to be able to pick and choose and be able to create a story in which they can issue these things and do. I want to do a story in Avernus. I do think the nature of tabletop games is such that it doesn't encourage that way of thinking as much, and it doesn't encourage that way of gaming, and so it turns everything into the same fantasy thing, or multiversal elements of it, or whatever. But I stayed away from fantasy. I would have said that I wasn't a fan of it until I realized that fantasy was a broader context. Because, like, I love Sandman. Sandman is a fantasy story. It's not, there's no elves and dwarves and whatever, but anything that has those fantastic elements, anything that is a departure from that speculative fiction is technically fantasy. So I found myself realizing what I didn't like was kitchen sink fantasy. And so what I tried to do whenever I created something was to pry under the lid of whatever genre, whatever I was working in. And a lot of it is, it's me addressing something that feels. I'm trying to think about how much time I should take.
No,
there's a
don't worry.
concept.
Keep going. You're good.
There's a concept that I call genre decay, which is when you find yourself imagine you're explaining something to a friend. You're watching some show or some game or something that's based off of, it's very fantasy coded, or very like sci-fi or a subgenre, or whatever. And they go, well, why is that? If you find yourself, well, that's just like a thing in the genre, that's a problem. because that thing in the genre exists because originally in some of the things that created the genre that served a purpose, but now it has simply become something that you just do, which is an unexamined element of the game, which to me, it's creating chaff and bloat. It's creating things that disrupt the natural functioning of what art is supposed to do, which is to communicate, which is to create ideas out of what is there and what isn't. So to just have things in your thing because that's what the genre does, to me feels like a very unobserved way to do it. And so that's something I've always striven for. With fantasy, I stayed away from it because it felt like an impossible ask to do that. And so part of what I've created here is me attempting that on a scale I've never done before, trying to take Western fantasy style, swords and horses and castles and dragons and all that stuff, and tame it down into a version of itself that feels like every element is there because I wanted it to be there. And so that required me stripping everything away from it and injecting fantasy in very carefully. So, I nothing is there that is originally there. And what is there that is a reflection of those things is because I felt as if I had something to say about it. When I'm writing something, there's a concept that I use for myself called solving it twice. I had a friend, big movie buff. I have a friend. He's great. He understands everything about movies in ways that I wish I could. But there's a movie called Seven Psychopaths. It's great. It's Willem Dafoe. No, Christopher Walken, not Willem Dafoe. Jesus, Christopher Walken and oh god, the guy from In Bruges. I can't remember it. Colin Firth. No, I don't remember. It's not important. The point of the story is that it is a very meta thing because the guy is writing a movie about seven psychopaths, and he ends up embroiled with actual psychopaths. And the point of the movie is pointing at how movies misinterpret what's a psychopath is, and it creates a story that is about the ways in which they are made more colorful or more unrealistic. And it's him engaging with characters who he just would in movies described as psychopaths and realizing the humanity or the lack thereof in them at various points, realizing how incorrect that movie style assessment of psychopaths is. And I was telling him, I saw this movie, it was Seven Psychopaths, it's really great. And he says, oh yeah, no, I saw that. Hey, that's fine. So what are you talking about? It has all these interesting things to say about, the nature of movie making and the nature of storytelling. And I said, it does a really great job of undermining these elements. And he goes, yeah, but I wish it just did those things better. Instead of making a movie that's just about how to make a better movie, just make a better movie.
That does the things you're talking about.
Holy hell, that's absolutely. That's so when I do something, when I write something because of that revelation, I try to do what I call solving it twice. In a satire, you show something, you put a lampshade on something and go, isn't that a problem? Or you go, oh, well, I'm going to create a justification for why that thing would exist, and then that patches over. It does because and there's an in-world answer. What I want to do is what I call solving twice, which is to point out that there is a problem, create an in-world explanation for why it could work, and then explore why it doesn't and the problems it creates logistically in a world that assumes that this thing should exist. So if there's an element that feels like, why would that be there? Well, because it is. Wrong. Why would it be there? Oh, because this thing in the world does this and yada. Okay, fine. But we're still using that to travel back to a genre, to resemble a genre in a way where it wouldn't work anyway. So I create that, and then I create that bridge, and then I burn the bridge down behind me on purpose and go, it would still be a problem. So, can I give you an example? Because that was pretty abstract.
Yeah, please.
Lord of the Rings is, in my estimation, a love letter to the Canterbury Tales. J.R.R. Tolkien was a huge medieval scholar, and you can't get even close to medieval literature without talking about Canterbury Tales, the most influential literary work from that period. And Canterbury Tales was so influential because it was a very simple thing. It was essentially a travel journal of a bunch of people from different parts of society going on a pilgrimage. And that was like that because that was a real thing that people did.
Yeah.
In the Middle Ages, people would, it was really the only time that you would come across, it was the beginnings of us going from the Dark Ages to the Middle Ages, where instead of only ever meeting the people 100 feet around you at any given time, you go out and Europe was beginning to interconnect in ways that it didn't before. And
Yeah.
so people from different strata of society were going out on this pilgrimage, on these established pilgrimage routes, were sometimes more established than other times, and they were meeting each other. And they'd go on these little adventures where sometimes the path was blocked, and they had to find another way around, or there are brigands on the highway, or these little everyday adventures of people going out and doing something that seemed extraordinary to them. Because people in their lives had come back from doing a pilgrimage and telling them about their time at spring break, their 1 year pilgrimage, and filling, putting stars in the eyes of kids, and then they go out and they do the same thing. And so these people from different walks of life travel literally eastward into a different place to do something, and then come back and they're changed forever. And to me, Tolkien, when he created Lord of the Rings, and when it was when he introduced these different fantasy races, the idea of them was supposed to be that they represent exotic lands that we had never known.
Yes.
Hobbits and elves and dwarves, and they are different people with different wants and needs. And instead of just simply making them different cultures, he highlights that by making them different races. So the
Yes.
whole point of that is to, again, harken back to Nordic fantasy tropes of there being elves and dwarves and things, and in that medieval way, but also pushing it into Canterbury Tales, pushing it into you're from Spain and you've never met anyone from England before, and they're just so different from you. So
yeah, and even kind of highlighting how like some cultures were very secluded, like the dwarves lived in a mountain with giant doors, and like the elves had like ports. And they would have and the hobbits were just like, oh, you want to come hang out? Like anyone can come hang out. So just kind of like showing even how culturally how they were all different, not just besides their race is different, but how they grew up and how they did things as well. But
my problem, as great as that is, my problem with that is that its large scale adoption into modern fantasy is done so of a desire to repeat what was there rather than understanding what that's for. Because I have two big problems with that. One, when you have these races in your story because it's what's comfortable and what people know, you're countermanding the original point of it. The point isn't that you're supposed to be comfortable with these, that it's fantasy and you're used to seeing dwarves and elves and everything. They don't feel exotic, so it's not the point. Secondly, from a very nitpicky, nerdy level, I've always found the idea. Yeah, I know. I've always found the idea of different fantasy races coexisting on the planet to be ridiculous, because that did happen in our reality, and the result of that wasn't they all made it and they all get along. The result of that is there's only one hominid species that survived and everything else died. Either you intermarried into Homo sapiens or you're gone. Cro-Magnons are gone, Neanderthals are gone, they're all gone. And that, the idea, why, if elves are so much better than humans,
sorry about that.
If elves are so much better than humans, how the hell are there humans? How did we make it? How is there not a single village or two of Homo sapiens, and then elves come and they squish us because they've been around for longer, they have better technology, they're faster, they're magical.
Yeah. They can see for miles, they have better ears, they have better eyes, they can shoot a bow a quarter mile away. Like everything is better about them than about us. So how do we? No, I never thought of it from that perspective. But being like, I'm a science teacher, like certain things, certain tropes always bother me. Like I hate werewolves. I think werewolves are the stupidest thing in the world because it's like, oh well, they only come out on a full moon. I'm like, the moon reflects sunlight. Why don't they come out during the day? If anything, they should always be a werewolf until there's a new moon when the moon is blocked.
As a digression to my digression, there's another phrase I often go by. I create these little idioms for myself so I remember them. But are you familiar with the Arthur C. Clarke line? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic?
Yes.
I think the opposite is also true. any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from technology. And when you're trying to write a story about magic, I think that there is a tendency to want to overdevelop the magic so that everything has an explanation, because we are coming from a perspective of wanting the world to work in a scientific mindset, because that's what we're used to. Because the idea of a world that just works because it does is too old-fashioned for it. It doesn't function. We can't suspend that disbelief anymore. So we need to create a way in which magic works. But in my mind, all you're doing is doing science fiction the long way around. The more you explain magic, the less magic it is. So
Correct.
my answer is for werewolves, the moon is always full, but it's not because magic. That should be the answer. It shouldn't have any logic because magic. That's how magic should feel. It should feel weird and alien and uncomfortable. There's a spell, Tenka's Magic Disc. That's like, it always hovers 2 feet above the ground. And people go, oh, what happens if it goes off a cliff? Oh, does it fly off? No. It goes 2 feet above the ground. So the moment it hits a cliff, in my mind, it immediately either plummets or teleports down there. Because it's
instantaneous.
Because it's 2 feet above the ground. People say, oh, feather fall. You should be able to pick someone up and throw them because they're light. They're not light. They fall slower. That's a different thing. And yeah, it doesn't make sense. That's the point. It doesn't make sense. So
yeah, I completely agree.
So, like I said, to give you an example, keeping these things in mind, when I did fantasy races in my setting, I gave an excuse for why they're there, because they're new to the world. In my setting, people didn't used to have magic. It's our world, and then a new exotic alien pantheon of gods came here, and they made the world magic. And so they made fantasy races. So sure, great. I created an excuse for myself, but I don't think that's enough. So the point is that some of them are going extinct, because even in the 1,000 or so years that they've been here, that's already happening. Because no matter when they start, that's not really how society works.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to all of a sudden jump us to a civilized society where people get along enough to not just completely destroy other species, you can argue that would happen, because you have a society that is intentionally trying to do that, much in the same way that we are now trying to intentionally keep pandas from being going extinct, or whales or whatnot. But the point is, the natural course of things would not be gentle. Nature is not a beneficent steward of life, and we would have to go out of our way to make pains to keep other fantasy races from going extinct on their own, which is what was happening. That would be a major problem. So
did you kind of weave that into the aspect of your game? Now there's conflict, and with conflict comes consequences.
Well, sometimes it's direct conflict, and sometimes it's just, I do something that I call a smudge pass. Whenever I write something, I try not to write everything the same way. So like, if I have like 8 cities, right? And I go, okay, I need to come up with food for all of them, dances for all of them, whatever. A smudge pass would be going, okay, so I should come up with 10, dishes for every, 10, 3 dishes for every region, 5 different, dances. And I go, wait. Some regions wouldn't have it. So no. I'd be doing 9 dishes here and 1 dance. It's blurring the kinds of world building so that it's not cookie cutter, where every area is defined by the same criteria, that even the criteria by which they are defined is itself different based off of what the world should be. Not every region would have as many different types of literature. Why would they? Not every
absolutely.
So
you see that locally here in the States, how not every region has the same thing.
Right, exactly.
That's great.
And that's part of the flavor. So some of them are going extinct because of conflict, some of them not. Some of them it's other things, and some of them are doing great.
But that does lead to like certain things where it's like, hey, these guys are doing great. Why aren't we doing great? I want to do great.
Also, what's important to you as a viewer, as someone who's coming into this world? Are you trying to preserve the magic that's here? How important? This is what I mean by finding new tender flesh to bite. I want the consequences to not just be this person in this village dies. I want you to contend with the idea that magic is as a player, magic is something you want to experience, and it's not necessarily immortal. Magic can die. The things that magic can give you can die. And that death doesn't always look the same as everything else, but how important is it to you to preserve magic? How do you think it's valuable at all? Do you think magic should go away? Do you think that this is something that is hurting the world more than it's helping? Or do you think it's worth fighting for? And if it is, what are you willing to give up? Everything has consequences, even the engagement with the concept of magic, even the desire to have it there. You're a player sitting at the table hoping to engage in something magical. So my assumption is, on some level, you want magic to be real. Well, put up or shut up. Let's figure out how to make you play.
No, I like that, because what you're saying too is like, I forget where I saw it. It was like an old clip of like Trey Parker and Matt Stone doing like a South Park thing. And they said, if you find yourself telling a story and going, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then that's not the way you should tell it. It should be like, and then if this happens, then here's what's going to happen. Then if that happens, then like, so going from an if then instead of an and then, which I kind of see what you're kind of doing here, but with more, like you said, biting the tender flesh, more grit, more like, not only is this thing going to happen and something else is happening because of it, but something horrible may happen on the other end that you may or may not be aware of until now or till later.
Well, and again, I want you to think about what your priorities are, because you go, oh God, I didn't realize I cared that much about that. On the South Park, Matt Parker, what are the names?
Matt Stone and Trey Parker, yeah.
I have an internal rule for myself, and sometimes it takes the form of smudge pass, or sometimes it's genre decay. But every third thing I write, I either question or get rid of. So just to keep myself honest, every time I do it, instead of just letting myself go, oh, then these people would do this, and then they do this, and then every third thing I go, hold on, why is that there? And I can't do it for everything, because then I'd never get anything done. But if you set a structure where I keep myself from going too far off the beaten path, because when I do it like that, if I go back and I go, I don't like that, that's too generic, or I don't like where I was coming from that, it doesn't go very far until it gets clipped. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, I impose these rules on myself, and I've had other people tell me, other creatives say that I'm being too strict, or that I'm choking out the life from it. But I don't know. To me, I think it's important. It's really easy for me to maintain internal consistency now, because as I'm going, I can develop it as I want. And I'd rather create off of something that I made than constantly stare at a blank sheet. Those consequences cut both ways, and I need to make sure when I do the writing, when I make these things, they are internally consistent, that they are thematically consistent, that they are morally consistent, that the theme of consequences being driven through, because I want it to exist as a communicable core concept, that the players, when they're engaging in it, they will feel this concept. They will feel that I want to communicate the idea of consequence to them, and I can't do that unless I make sure that it's like a laser being focused, that everything is pointed in that way, rather than it going scattered in a million different ways. So yeah, I think it's really important to. Again, I'm biased because that's my personal perspective on writing, but I think it's important to give yourself that constantly, and to be harsh on yourself in that way, and go, no, this isn't. I don't just get to do this because I'm on this flight of fancy. I think that's part of writing.
Yeah, I think that's like a great driving point to have, and be strict with, instead of saying, I'm just going to throw this in, and if anyone questions me, I'm the writer and I say so. I think having that perspective is not like great, because even like being a player, I've sometimes had DMs. I'm like, well, why can't I do this? Like, well, you just can't.
Just can't.
Okay, cool. It's like, all right, you can go north, south, east, and west. All right, we go west. There's a wall there. Cool. Like, why was that even an option? So yeah, I think having being strict with yourself and holding yourself to a higher standard will only lead to things that you're happy with. So I think having that perspective is really good.
I agree. And look, I'm not infallible. I'm sure that there are inconsistencies.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure that there are things that I'll go back and I don't like as much. At some point I have to compromise, and I have to make, it's like making like making a grand design on a like a pattern in like a carpet or something, or in a mosaic. If the pattern breaks, you just kind of shove a rug over that part of it and go, that's fine. But I want to reduce the amount of rugs I put down.
No, I definitely like that. So, talking more about the game itself. So,
Sure.
main theme being consequences. Is there a preferred play style that you got from other games, from playing tabletop games that you try to incorporate? Is it more of like plot driven? You want the character to drive it,
I'm
kind of
sorry.
like Sandbox?
You cut out a little bit. I don't want to interrupt you, but you cut out a little bit. I want to
Sorry.
make sure I understand. Could you repeat that?
No
No,
problem.
it's-
When making this game, was there a certain
Yeah.
play style that you were leaning towards, like not so much plot driven, or is it more character driven? Is it kind of like Sandbox, where I'm just going to dump the players into this environment and they kind of have to figure it out?
Well, I'll tell you what I did, which is something that no one should do. This game is built off the bones of it was the first table I actually ever really ran, because like I said, I came at this from an oblique angle. It was a heavily modified D&D 5e until, and not even for very long, until I went, actually, we're just going to abandon that. So it was, you can't play as any of the fantasy races. You can't play as a magic casting class. You can't like this. You can't do that. And then a lot of the mechanics were like, it's in a different realm. The mechanics you can't do this. One of the things that, like, for instance, I caught a little flack for was I changed what some of the skill requirements were. I don't want to go too far on a tangent here, but I hate the idea that by naturally in 5e, clerics have better eyesight than barbarians because they have a higher wisdom stat.
Yeah.
So I changed perception to be a strength skill, because it should be based off of like the either constitution or strength, but it should be, your body's virility.
Yeah, absolutely.
A thing. So I said, no. Perception is not. That's strength.
Yeah, and even think about like, barbarians have danger sense, so they can sense danger and they can't get ambushed, but they can't see something that's 20 feet away from them. Like, what are we talking about here?
I think I can loop this back. Stand back. I think I can loop this back into what I'm about to talk about. To me, I think there's a difference in game design between top-down and bottom-up design. And to me, that's a great example of top-down. And it's something that I don't love, because you go, oh no, barbarians don't have a natural sense for because of the stats. I'll just patch it over with a bespoke feat.
Yeah.
And to me, I believe strongly that the smallest possible unit of gameplay in a game should itself be compelling, and that a tabletop game is one that is, it's because it's a language that you're using to describe reality. You need to always keep fluency in mind so that you can transition between things easily. So the more bespoke elements you have, the more top-down elements you have, the harder it is to incorporate everything in naturally. It's a language that has more dead ends, more irregular verbs, more things like that. So it was really important to me that I create a mechanical system that allowed for a universality of description of thought, but also increased the gameplay and the decision making and the tension and the drama in the smallest possible unit, which is the die rolling. And so, to answer your question, do I consider this a more story-driven thing, a more sandbox-driven thing? I don't want to put those I don't want to put those blinders on DMs one way or the other.
Yeah.
What I hope I did was create, the mechanics are designed so that you can engage at them in different paces. You can go really in depth, or you can do like something quicker. And I really want it to be able to be something that can flex between those, that it can go from, sandboxy to like a very, story-driven character, a very like mechanical. And I want the mechanics to be able to push that. So like I said, I wanted the stats to reflect that reality so that you can inject your character, so your character will feel like their character. But in terms of whether or not where you can apply that, I kind of want that to be within the fluctuating scale of DM decision. I want that to be within the flow of what they can do, and they make that choice. So, like, if you want it to be, if you really want it to be very character driven, you're probably going to make a lot of moments very small, and you're probably going to make those. You're probably going to make those small moments really large, and you're going to really dig into it. Where if you want it to be a more larger world thing, it's probably going to be quick, breezy moments so you can get to as much as you can, and everything in between, like engaging with that as you need. The aperture should open and close. So again, getting too abstract, let me make it concrete. The core rolling system in the game is there's a lot of choices that you make just in the rolls, because to me, like I said, tabletop games often derive complexity, game choice, and narrativity from the top down, from the things that you can plug into the core mechanics. What's my class? What are my feats? What are my spells? What are my things? That's where you put the flavor. That's where in a fight, it's mostly the position of the minis. How wide is the spell? How whatever, how many tiles does it hit? How far am I? If you're doing tactical things, that's all on the top level down. The core element of a tabletop game is a very passive experience. What do I do? This is what I did. All of the gameplay is either, like I said, added from the top down or done far in advance in the character creation. And because of that, a lot of games often have, when they create that complexity, they make a very complicated, bespoke character creation. They can feel more like doing your taxes, and it can feel very like restraining to what you want to do. Again, limiting the value of that choice. Or it can be breezy to the point where you're just losing structure to the game in order to make it uninhibited, and then forcing more of the gameplay to be done on the top level down. So either dependency on content or asking DMs to inject gameplay themselves. So what I wanted to do was create a rolling system that was itself a more complex language with which you can use to speak mechanics in the game. So when you roll, you have a bunch of choices to make. You have to. I say, oh, you got to do this. You got to sprint over there. I say that's this specific stat. So you roll that many die, and you see how high you get. But a lot of actions can be done with different stats, and it's very much an important part of the game. And those different stats have different mechanical implications. For which stat you use can change the nature of the action, and it has its own mechanical implications. And because I have these three different stats, these stats have their own. There's no spell slots. There's none of that. All these stats have their own stamina pool: your body, heart, and mind. So whenever you do a body action, something you use using your strength, it uses from that. So you have to figure out, like I said, how much, like what stat you're going to be using, not just what approach you do. And then there is a rolling system. I don't want to get too much into detail, but when you roll, you have to decide what the upper limit of your roll can be, and you spend that much stamina. So how important is any given moment to you? How important is it to try to be perceiving to see if there's threats around you? Because I don't care how perceptive you are, if you don't put enough stamina, put enough towards that, your character wasn't paying enough attention. So it creates this internal language of even just rolling. What stat am I using? What focus am I using? Like, how am I approaching a combat? Am I whatever? How did I create my character? How much stamina do I want to give into this role? And all these other elements that are adding tension, they're adding complexity, they're adding a sort of a scary need to reflect into the world to understand it well, that the gameplay choices in the rolling. And as a result, the top level stuff is a lot less complex, but there's still space for it. If you want to add those top level things in, you are inviting a deeper level of complexity because you're laying that on top of the more complex rolling system, which is why I tried to make as many of those top level things interwoven into the stats, so that rather than just feeling like they're just thing added on, these classes, these weapons, whatever, would scale off of these stats, would engage with your rolls, and thus those rolls themselves retain their potency, and it feels more interwoven. Like, oh, sorry, go on.
No, it's like I like the idea of like having agency where you could roll these things, but then there's also a level of resource management where
Right.
you need to make sure you're managing A, B, and C correctly. Because if you, how much do you, like you said, like if you just kind of look, if you're standing in the middle of a town and you're just looking around, you're probably not
Right.
going to put too much stamina or effort to that. But if you're in the middle of a dark woods,
Yeah.
maybe you overexert yourself for a certain level of stamina, and that comes back to bite you on the tail end. So having that agency and resource management, and I can definitely see there's a background there in Magic because I played Magic well. One of the big things of those types of competitive games is resource management. You have to manage how much you spend and how much you want to commit to something, and if you overcommit, it could really bite you in the back end.
No, I think you're right. I think I never really thought about it, but it probably is coming from a pretty from a Magic the Gathering. But yeah, I mean, it's because again, I want it to feel like a reflection of you in the world, and that I find when players run it, all of a sudden, like there's murder hobos. I don't really have to deal with them. I don't really have to deal. Like people get very scared, and all of a sudden they go, "Whoa, let me think about what I'm doing." It's like that's perfect. That's what I want.
Yes.
So my point is that flexing aperture of world design of motivation. If you want to use those more complex rolling rules, it's going to be this kind of intense personal moment. But there are optional rules that the DM can relax to make a more passive style roll, a more simple, you roll this, you get this. And those moments are specifically designed to be faster, more fluid. And even in the tighter rules, there's tighter versions of those. There's something called free play, which is you just roll to see what you do. And then an engagement. Engagement's like roll initiative now that we're doing battle rules. And that exists for social situations, that exists for what I call talents, which is like skills and things, and it exists for combat. So it could be I conk the guard on the head and we keep walking, or I go to square up against the guard and he pulls out, a sword and a shield and we have a whole battle. Anything can have that level of complexity where we're wagering in an engagement and we're not wagering at all. And because of that, as you go, the DM can kind of set that pace and let you just let them decide when do we zoom, when do we pull out. And I think that creates a throughput to allow for, like you said, character-driven, plot-driven, narrative-driven, gameplay-driven at various times.
No, that's good. It's definitely good to be able to flex and roll between those two things because definitely you don't, especially me, like just coming from like a Dungeons and Dragons background, if it gets too much towards one thing, then to me it gets kind of like, all right, like one of my, like Mike was saying that he has like he's in a band, and someone, I forget if it was someone in a different band, was saying like they have like this sandbox game DM Dungeons and Dragons game where they just run a restaurant, and I'm like I work a job. I don't want to go play a game where I'm work. He's like, but to them, it's like they have to go and like fulfill the orders. They have to check their stock. They have to do this, and it's like they have to manage their gold and how do they want to spend. I'm like, that sounds really stressful, like real life. But having it explained that way, than just like, oh, you work a job. Like having it, yeah, it could be broad, but it could be narrow, and there's real stresses and real agencies in there that allows it to be unique. And having a level of stress, I think, is really good for gaming. And I think that's one of the things, to me, like being a video game person, that I don't like about games now is there's always a quick save or an auto save. Like back when I played Donkey Kong, if I was 40 minutes into the level and I died, I went all the way back to the beginning. And I was like, oh my God, this is so, like, it would wrench my heart and make me so angry and frustrated, and to do the same thing over and over again. But it built in a way then that these decisions matter, and how much you want to do with them matters as well.
Well, and again, it's, there's different ways to flex that. Because, yeah, I'm a big Dark Souls fan. Sometimes those salty runbacks are far too long. So I understand the need for the tape, but sometimes I'm like, oh my God, this is infuriating. So again, having the ability to flex that within the same system, I think was really important to me, to be able to like, no. If we want to go past this part, we can. It's funny you mention running a restaurant, though, because, okay, what I was going to say before, I got sidetracked because that's who I am. When I was running the game with my players, I asked them, because the system has, well, this is before the system, but this is still what I was thinking of in terms of what a TTRPG can have. It can have exploration, role playing or combat. Is how it was explained, or like deeper combat, and that kind of became the three focuses are combat, talent, and social. So I was thinking of it in those terms when I was creating the world, and so I asked my players. I said, "Okay, we're gonna submit a thing. I want you to each individually give me first, second, and third place for what's the most important to you, secretly, and then we're gonna see what we get." And I have one of 6 campaigns in mind for which one is going to be what we're going to do, and it's going to be a combination. It's going to be pure combat, pure talent, pure social, and then the mixes between them. Because if I had these vague ideas, it wasn't fleshed out. They gave me such an across the board scattershot that I decided to do something very stupid, which is I created all 6 campaigns. I wrote the bare bones of them, the skeletons of them first, and then wrote the first level of each one, the first thing to do. And then I said, okay, it's a sandbox. You can chase these storylines down as far as you like, and then when you want to change to a different one, go ahead and do that. So it kind of was designed to be both a sandbox and a plot-driven thing at the same time, kind of in the way that Skyrim is, where you can do the whole Archmage of Winterhold thing, but you can at any time just abandon that and go do something new.
Yeah.
And again, it created a mountain of work for me, but that actually ended up being so. It's not out yet because it's future stuff. But there are 7 planned campaigns, and they're based off of those campaigns that are intended to be played in that way. And one of them is actually running a restaurant.
Oh, really? That's funny. It's funny too, because
but yeah, it's literally running. Because when it wasn't originally one of the campaigns, and I said that's why I said 7 because I decided to make one that's a combination of all 3 rather than and then when I was designing the mechanics, one of the things I did to ensure that the mechanics worked the way that they wanted to was that at any time I could run a campaign that was entirely running a restaurant, because it just seemed to be such a departure that was like, it has such a thematic cohesion that people would get, but I don't really see TTRPGs do that. So I said, as long as this game will always be functional if I can make a restaurant. And so I ended up building a little things around that. And then when I was designing the campaigns, I went a little further down the line. I went, wait a minute, that's a campaign. Like, it didn't work. I should just do it.
No, it's funny too how you phrase it and work these things in, because I really from what you're saying, it sounds incredibly interesting. It sounds intricate. It, like you said, it gives agency. It has purpose. It has consequence. It has feeling.
Right.
Do you think, as you were DMing or running these campaigns, were there certain ways that you tried to weave in hints or importance or crucial things without too much giving it away? Or was it kind of I want to let them stumble upon it organically?
So my approach probably evolved slightly over more than I'm probably realize over the course of my playing. I really, because of the system, because a lot of the elements of it, information is king, and so I took a very strong internal stance that information needed to be earned. And so I had a very strong line between what was free information and what they had to pay for. Again, literally the formula system, because
Yes.
I want it to be part of the cost-benefit analysis. Understanding a situation is the best way to get the most bang for your buck, but it should cost you something to do that. So players tend to be pretty hesitant to ask a lot of questions, which was anathemic to the point. So what I would often do is give, like I said, free information that would be laced with hints of well, maybe this is something you should pay a little closer attention to. That said, I am a cruel and terrible god, and I would intentionally sometimes hide valuable information in the flow of a sentence that felt like it wasn't important. That was hey, if they caught that, there's something valuable there. Or I would sometimes emphasize things that don't matter. Specifically because I wanted to challenge them to see if they could, rather than following the tone of my voice, follow the context of the situation, to see if they could get context, if they could get information that was valuable.
Would you
It was
deal out
me.
this information like specifically maybe just to one person so only they knew? Or is it kind of like given to the table in a sense?
So yes and no. I would do that. Usually we played over Discord, so I would just type them information. But
Okay, yeah.
this is a sort of a table rule. This isn't in the system or anything. I have a moment that I call a free swap, which is essentially when characters are in a situation where they are not in peril, they're not currently focusing on something else, where they have time. It is automatically assumed, unless the players tell me otherwise, that any pertinent information they have is automatically shared. If they want to
Okay.
role play, they can, but I don't accuse them of, you didn't tell them that. I assume that as soon as they have the opportunity to do so, their characters reasonably would. There are times in which, like for instance, one thing I am most likely to impugn, and again, this is a stylistic choice more than anything,
Yeah.
is I will listen very carefully to the language that someone uses for something. So if they're like sneaking through a mansion and they don't say, when they say, I go into this room, I said, you go in? So yeah, I said, you didn't say you snuck in. You said you went in. So unless they say, I am sneaking, everything I'm doing from now is sneaking, I will kind of keep them to the letter of the law of what they say, because I don't want to go, oh, as you walk in, you hide because you didn't. You didn't do that. You should pay more attention to the context. That's a
Yes.
pretty unfair example to illustrate what I mean, but they're a little bit more like if they walk in and they go, hi, how you doing? And I go to reach his hand. If that doesn't fly in that social situation, I go, I'm sorry, they hate you. Because you told me. You didn't say, well, how do they like to, kind of look around, or people? No. You just say, how you doing? Okay.
Yeah.
So, like
No,
I said, free
I do like that
information.
aspect of it. I do like that aspect of like I want to hold you to what you're doing. And I do like the aspect like information being king and you got to pay for that information. Do you sometimes I know like one thing like I try to do is sometimes when someone does like to see is this person telling me the truth? I go, yeah, roll. Look, they roll or whatever, and then I'll just go and only like whisper in their ear or like send them a text so that they're the only one that knows. And now that gives them the power and the agency to decide, is this something I want to share? Or
Right.
maybe I'll keep it in my back pocket for later.
So I did try to do that when I could, but a lot of times, it didn't. My players weren't very keen on keeping secrets from each other, so they would.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
So I stopped doing that as much because they like if it wasn't something that they were personally engaged in, what's the point? I actually ended up creating a table rule that called Bond, which is you have the ability to roll to see if your character would be able to predict what the other character would do, and if they do, you as a player are allowed to act on that information. So it's about turn it into a test of how well does your character know your character? How do they know, like, if they see a commotion on the other side of the fort, do they know that that's them getting caught in what they're doing? And if they predict well enough, they go, yeah, your character knows. What are you doing? But you actually just reminded me of. I don't know if I'm proud of this. I mean, I am. It's very silly. One of the characters originally, and this is based off of D&D. This is in my personal campaign. He wanted to be a conspiracy theorist. That was his shtick. He wanted to be a sorcerer who didn't understand magic and was just a conspiracy theorist. But the problem is he wanted to be very dumb, but he wanted to he wanted to do Arcana. And I said, Arcana is an intelligence thing. He said, well, can I do charisma for it? I said, that would be kind of tough. He goes, okay, I'll just do it, and I'll just be wrong all the time. And so I said, okay, I'll make you a deal. I will allow you to roll charisma for Arcana, but you don't roll. I roll. And I don't tell you what you get. So the information I tell you could be right, or it could be wrong. And you, as a player, have no way of knowing. You just have to take it as gospel either way. So, like, if you rolled low once, and I said, this makes sense to you because elves run the moon. There's no elves. That's not good.
But being a conspiracy theorist, you might think that elves
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
run the moon.
Well, and actually, that's his great. I let him again. I used a custom array. I let them put their stats wherever they wanted to. He had like an intelligence of like 4. It was ridiculous. So there was a situation where he had to like read something to help, and he literally, I said, "You can't read. I'm sorry. You're declared as intelligent as a player."
You're illiterate.
So he he's like, well, I have to be capable of at least that. So he leveled up and he increased his intelligence. And I decided to contextualize that as you begin to realize as you look around you that strange markings that you just discounted as decoration start to impel meaning into your mind unbidden. That when you look at them, you realize they're communicating to you. Essentially, he discovered reading, and as a conspiracy theorist, assumed foul intent. And I said, so you decided to keep it to yourself in case scare your compatriots. Again, it was a way to contextualize how he went from not being able to read to being able to read magically because he's a sorcerer. I said, sure, that's fine.
Yeah.
I allowed him to be a sorcerer early on, and then I changed my mind. But so from then on, he made it a thing where he wouldn't let people watch him read because he's like, well, no, it's a conspiracy. I got to keep that to myself because that's going to scare them. So
no, that's funny because it was actually funny with having like the information and the reading thing because the campaign I'm going to be running next, like pulling back a little bit, I gave the guy, we rolled for stats, but one thing I told him is, I know what you can do. I go, you guys can take an automatic 18 in any stat you want, but one of your other stat has to be a 3. And they're like, oh, the 2 of them. And I said, you don't have to do this. You can just roll all of them and be fine. But 2 out of the 3 of them were like, I'm taking the 18 and the 3. I'm taking it. I'm like, because to me, I'm like, I like that. I like that it adds consequence to it. And it's like, you can be really good at something, but it also means if you're dedicating that much time to being good at that, you have to be really bad at something else.
Well, I actually, you made me realize, and this is a pure digression. This has nothing to do with the question you asked me, so I apologize.
No, that's fine. No, we've been. I love the conversation we're having, so please continue.
Okay. So I realized something. Again, when I was creating the mechanics to my system, I was trying to learn as much as I could about player psychology. Learn as much about why people want certain things, because I knew how I felt about it, but this is the first time I was designing it, for other people to do something.
Yeah.
To engage in what that is. And I started thinking about stats and characters and power leveling and power gaming. And I realized something. I think it's very tempting to assume that players always want power. They always want to level up because they want to be strong, because they want to engage in the power fantasy. But as much as that can happen and does, and is probably true to some extent for everyone, I do think there's another motivation at play, and I think it gets at the core of what a lot of tabletop games do, which is they only allow differentiation from a standard norm once you've accrued enough power. Your standard array starts at pretty level, everything is basically the same, and then you are allowed over time to give yourself a high strength or high dexterity or whatever, or you have a bunch of abilities that let you do different things.
Yeah.
I think that there's a tension, there's a certain frustration that players have with that, where they want to engage in the game, but they want more tools, they want more interactivity, they want a greater degree of control over their character sheets. So they want higher levels because they want to have high strength, not because they want to be strong, because they want a character that is strong. That's the fantasy. They don't have to wait till level 20 in order to have a character that has a high in this and a low in this. So I think it's really important to allow characters to be weak or strong from jump, from the get-go, because I think trying to balance it so much around that, like the standard array, ends up being very restraining. All the classes feel very similar at level 1, and they change over time, and that's no one wants to start a level 1 campaign. Everyone wants to start a campaign at least at level 3, because that's when everyone gets their specialization and they get to be even more special.
Yeah.
So I think it's very telling. I think it's telling that people want that power, not because they want to be, the great Doomslayer that just murders everything, because they want to be them. They want to be their god.
Yeah.
They want to be. You
And
know?
having that subclass, making that speciality, to me is a great way to allow you to envelop a backstory that then links that together.
Oh, sure. But it's also one of the frustrating things about D&D 5e, where in order to accomplish my character fantasy, like I said, it's like doing your taxes. You have to
Yeah.
decide so hard ahead of time that often when I make a character, and I haven't played a lot of 5e to be fair, but whenever I would make a character, I would make a level 20 character and then pare them down. I'd go, this is where I
Oh
want to
yeah.
get to, because I know what I'll want, because this is the fantasy I want. So a lot of times it wasn't like, oh, what do I get? It was, finally I get this. Finally I get to, I get this part of my character kit.
Yes, definitely. I
And,
definitely hear that a lot. Like, I
and it's
finally get this. Yeah.
right. And it's, I think, again, because people want to be the character they want to be, and they don't want to have to wait for it. And I think it's important. I think it's important to listen to that desire, because it's very easy to class that as selfish, or like as a power fantasy that might ruin the game, or that you're indulging in, and that's the point of the game. I think there's a space in between. It doesn't have to be, I want a wand of a ring of infinite wish because I want to be the most powerful thing. It's, I want to be my guy. I want to be. Driz Duorden doesn't feel like Driz Duorden until he has a panther and 2 magic swords.
No, I really love that aspect of it. We're getting towards the end here. Just we talk about so many things. Are there any words of advice you'd give people into breaking into the realm of tabletop gaming? Or just maybe creation, coming from a creation standpoint in general, creating some sort of tabletop game. They have an idea and they struggle with it.
So none of the advice I will give is practical, because I am inherently an impractical person. I feel like I talked a little bit about my writing process, how I feel writing should go. So I don't want to get too technical into those elements of it. But I think that it's the more you analyze what you're doing and why you're doing it, what you want to do, the easier it's going to be to stay on that track that you make for yourself. And that track doesn't have to stay unchanged. But to me, art, and a heady subject, and people define art in different ways. But for me as an artist, the way I define it is the one of the sensory organs of our species, of a culture. It's our ability to filter truth in a way that is difficult to perceive, and for someone to take that and crystallize it in an experience, so that instead of conveying that truth through words, which is your knowledge of it, you are conveying your understanding directly to their understanding. You are allowing them to learn something from you, not by giving them the words that they have to interpret and then learn and understand what that means, but by creating an experience that will inject in them an understanding that you have. It will communicate this thing to you. So in my mind, art has to be 3 things. It has to be communicative. You have to be saying something. It doesn't have to be something that is a great, man's inhumanity to man, or a great size thing. It's just the way that you see something, you are digesting a piece of truth and giving it to people. It has to be novel, not in the sense that it's not art if it's not literally the first person to do it, but you have to go through the journey of digesting that truth yourself for it to be that. It has to be something that you have created a language by which you are doing that from inside of yourself, rather than, like I said, genre decay. You're communicating something that you have analyzed, that you have put forth. And finally, I think an easy one to miss, I think art needs to be multiplicative. Art comes from experience. So I think art lives in those moments, in that space between the different vectors of your medium. If, like, I was making comics, and I would do, here are my images, here are the words, and, those are the things that convey meaning. But I want the sum of those parts to be lesser than what it ends up being. I want it that when you put those together, there's new meaning that springs forth from that, a new experience, something that's hard to put your finger on because it's not in the words and it's not in the image. It's how they are next to each other. Often when I would do page layouts, I would try to every single page, make it so that the panels conveyed something, just in the way that they're arranged, just in like how the images flow from one to the other, rather than just going, they are here, then they are here, then they are here. There's something about that page which creates meaning unto itself, combined with the words. And I think regardless of what artistic pursuit you're going with, art comes from that multiplication. It doesn't come from how profound any individual sentence is. It comes from the profundity that you get from combining those thoughts. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that long. Otherwise, the elements that are there need to be adding to each other to create an experience that does not exist without that specific combination. So whatever you make comes from that. You have to have an understanding of what your pieces do together better than what you expect any one person reading it to do, because you need to be the ultimate arbiter of the point you're putting across, so that there is one. So that when you create that meaning, people have a chance to accept and digest that meaning. Because if you don't understand it, how can they? And you don't have to understand it on a functional essay level, but it has to be something I don't like to say feel, because feel is a very flat way of describing it. Does it make you happy or sad? Anything can make you happy or sad. You don't get to control what makes people happy or sad, because they might have had a chihuahua when they grow up, and when they see a chihuahua, it makes them sad. You didn't make them sad. That did.
Yeah.
What you sense from the world, the truth that you have digested, you are putting that into something, into the cracks between the pieces that you are doing. You are gesticulating wildly at, like, do you see these things together? You kind of get what I mean? And that to me is when something is art. And not everything has to be artistic. If you want to create, like, I love going to a place that sells a great burger, and it's a great burger that's really, really well made. And I love that. They don't have to reinvent the burger every time. I don't need that every time.
Yeah.
So understand for yourself, if you are creating something that has a high level of craft because you think it's enjoyable and cool in a way of doing it, or if it is artistic. If it is artistic, if it contains art within it, understand why that is, what it's doing, what it's moving toward, what it's creating, what is compelling. Because otherwise, you are probably just going to create something that is craft. And craft is great, but it's not the same thing. It should be something that draws out from you.
I think making that delineation between those two things is really important. And I love the way you put your body, your soul, the effort. I can tell from the way you're speaking that the way you talk about art, it really comes from within you and from a place of true meaning. And like you said, that, and trying to get others to understand that meaning without so much just straight up telling them, hey, this is what this means.
Well, sorry. I
was just saying, I think that what you said was beautiful.
Thank you. Look, it's something I've dedicated my life to. It won't surprise anyone to know that I've been to therapy. And in therapy, I kind of realized artists do on a broader but more shallow scale what therapists do for an individual. I think people are, there's a chaos to the world. There's so much out there, and it helps to be able to have someone guide you through truth. And art can do that in a way that can convey a single truth to a large amount of people in a way that nothing else can. You can write it in a book, but if people don't understand it, it doesn't convey anything. It's just words to them. It's rote regurgitation. And so much of philosophy, so much of art, so much of academia is built on that unfortunate premise of just like, you've got to remember it. And I understand. I'm not impugning those things. That is the nature of how that journey works. You are supposed to have knowledge that you then turn into understanding that you can then convert into wisdom. That's just the natural progress. But art is about skipping that first level. You go straight from wisdom to someone else's understanding, or understanding to understanding, and you are imparting knowledge directly right into someone. And you can do that on a massive scale, because every single person is being guided through your experience to do that. And I think it's important to think about these things, because I think whether you intend it or not, you're affecting a lot of lives. There is a contract between the artist and the people that engage in the art. And I think you do them a disservice if you don't understand the power you wield as an artist. that you are injecting truth into them, whether you realize it or not. And I think it's your responsibility to make that truth a good truth, an important one, a helpful one, one that you believe in, something that conveys something that you think is better for the world for it to be in, rather than, accidentally not paying attention and trying to convey morals and meaning that you don't believe in, that make the world a worse place, that convince people of all sorts of things that just add to more chaos. I think that good feeling we get from understanding art, from going like, whoa, it's a moment of beauty. It's that comes from the serenity of understanding, to taking the chaos and putting it into context a little bit more. You have taken more of the background noise of being a sentient human being and shunted it together into a puzzle piece that makes sense. And I think that's an incredibly valuable thing to do for people. So I really think about it.
That's amazing. That's great. I love this talk. I love this conversation. I completely agree. As a teacher, I'm a high school physics teacher. I feel very much the same way about having. I don't want to just regurgitate things to them that they learn. I want them to experience and set up phenomenons in labs that make them think why. And then this way they're not just learning it, like you said, that you're not learning it for the sake of learning it. You're understanding it because you see it happen, and now you can relate that to things that have happened around you and things in the real world. Where honestly, from an art perspective, you're either creating or doing something unique to you, where I'm just kind of like saying, this is a thing in science that exists. But I think,
like I said at the
similar though.
Science is one of the prime apertures through which we perceive truth. Yeah. Science it's the receptive organ. Art is the digestive organ. And art can't exist without that receptive organ. We need people who study the humanities. We need people who study science. We need people who are generating or grabbing more truth from the cosmos, so that artists can take that and go, I think I get it in a way that people haven't around me yet, and I really need them to understand it because it made me feel more comfortable in the universe to have this piece of truth.
And I agree in having that morality to it, where I need to do this in a way that's beneficial to everyone. It's more than just me. It's about everyone and all of us benefiting together to create society and just happiness for all. And it really resonates with me.
And it's part of the contract. If you want,
absolutely,
the reason we value art, the reason we put that up on a pedestal, we respect artists to do that, is because of their contributions. So be concerned with your contributions. If you want to be famous for being an artist, if you want to get something off your chest, if you want to express yourself and for people to go, wow, that guy is an artist who expresses himself, you're supplying something. You're doing something for society. And much in the same way, if you build a bridge, I expect it to not collapse.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Before we close, before we end, tell everyone where to find you. Plug. You have no sponsors, so plug yourself. Where are the websites? What is everything we can find you on? Where to find everything so people know.
So I'll go a little bit more in depth this time, because last time I was very
yes.
So the name of the company, and I say company, it's just me. It's Subtle Giants, and so the company, the website is subtlegiants.com, and from there you can reach a variety of things that I intend to be avenues through which I can convey truth. I have an Instagram, that's Dan Cody Comics. I have, and I'm going to be posting art from there and also other things that I make. There is a Discord called Fool's Gold, although I do need to change the name because I did find out like the tabletop thing already. There is a YouTube in its infancy, but it's lore videos, and then there's going to be tutorial videos, probably actual plays and stuff like that. That is Subtle Giants at YouTube, so feel free to go there. Again, there's only 2 measly videos, but there will be more soon. The game is called Axes and Axes. It's not a World War II thing. The setting is called The Knowing Lands, and the first book is out. It is Axes and Axes, the beginner's guide. Here, I'm going to show you a picture of it.
Yes,
This
yes.
this is available. You can get it on the digital versions on itch.io or on DriveThru. On DriveThru, you can get the print to order. I'm going to conventions and pop-ups and things selling the booklet, but I hope to get it in stores and distributed in places soon. But if nothing else, I'll probably begin distributing it on my own through the mail. However the best I can. Again, very new to this.
No, it's fine. Is there a certain convention that you're coming up to next that you want people to come by and visit you at, or are you still?
So I do have to figure that out because there are a couple of local things that I've been invited to that I've been made aware of, but conventions, I don't know. I'd love to go to one of the bigger ones like Gen Con or whatever, but I have
Absolutely,
to get bigger first. I have to see how valuable it is. But what I will say is on the first, this is live, right? This is going out now?
Yep.
Okay, so there's time. On the first, I will be doing an RPG play event at Sanger Hall in Sunnyside. I don't remember the address offhand, so my bad. But
That's okay. Yeah, Sunnyside.
Yeah, that's going to be a play event. I'm going to be running a table. Hopefully, for the first time, I'm going to have other DMs run table, which is going to be fun. I'm going to be explaining the game a little bit, and I'm going to be selling stuff there. The next booklet, we're going to be play testing the first booklet of modules and like adventures and pre-made characters and NPC cards. That's all going to be there, and then we're going to be play testing that, and that will be coming out soon. And those will be available in all the same places. There is also a Printify shop, like T-shirts and stuff. You can get posters, T-shirts, and the art. All the art is me. All the writing is me. Everything is me. If there's any part of this you don't like, it's my fault. So,
but there's all the parts that we love. It's also you as well, brother.
So it's all me. There's no AI involved in any element of it. I made every part of it painstakingly, and that was a bad idea because I really should have learned InDesign. I just did everything in Photoshop, which is not good. But yeah, I wish I could tell you that I had a specific vendor. I mean, I go to Hex & Co. in the city a lot, and they are actually carrying some copies. I intend to be going to a lot of local stores and trying to con them into buying any books. Like I said, I'm a local creator. I just want to get my stuff out there. Hopefully, I'll be able to find larger machines, larger companies that can be a part of that process. But for right now, it's just me. So
no, that's great. I'm happy that you're able to plug all these things because what you're saying is amazing, and I want everyone to be engaged and get out there. So when you said the first, April 1st in Sunnyside.
April 1st, Sunnyside, Sanger Hall. It's going to be a play event. There's no cover. Sorry, I should say there's no cover. You are encouraged. Please do buy something from the bar, either drinks or food, because otherwise they might not let you come back. And for the other DMs that are going to be there, I do recommend if people can, if they can tip them. I'm not paying them. They're volunteers. So I want them to feel like it's worth it. I want DMs who want to volunteer because they want to, and I don't want them to have to choose between doing that and not being able to do so. So, don't pay me. If you really want to pay someone, pay them. And I am going to be selling like posters and books. If you really feel the spirit moves you, please grab those. But I don't want to charge a cover because I want everyone to just come in and do it. And I want this to be a good experience for everyone, the people hosting, the people DMing, everybody. So yeah, please come.
No, that's amazing. Thanks again, Daniel, for coming and joining me on this episode of Talking Crit. I really loved it. I really enjoyed it. And to everyone out there, I hope you go and see Daniel April 1st. And thanks again for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John.